Hi, I'm back to finish my just for fun plot revision of The Age of Scorpius by Milo Winter. For anyone just clicking on this video, you should go watch part 1 first if you haven't, because after my standard disclaimers, I'm going to jump right in where I left off. The same disclaimers for part 1 apply, namely that this video isn't for Milo Winter or anyone close to him, and those people should avoid watching this video. I'm also not rewriting this book for Milo Winter, so he extra shouldn't watch this video. Lastly, this video isn't meant to condemn the Age of Scorpius, the author, or his vision for his work. I'll talk more about my motivations for this rewrite at the end of this video if you're curious why I decided to make this. Final note, audio quality. I'm recording in a location with very little soundproofing, so there will probably be some background noise on this video. I apologize for that. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's get back into the rewrite of The Age of Scorpius. When the Sagittarian cops arrive at Rowan's house, Avia uses her Cancer spirit walking to briefly Jedi mind trick them away from the house by decreasing their suspicion. Chase and Rika hide out in the back room, or whatever, until they go, and once they're gone, the three of them hightail it out of the house. Chase offers to get them on a transport for non-Sagittarians and non-Scorpios so that they can get their information safely off-world. This has a little bit of a complication because Rika is a Scorpio and her movements are heavily policed. When Avia, hothead thrill seeker that she is, says that she wants to go with the two of them, Rika is a little hesitant at first because Avia's only like 16 or 17, but Chase convinces Rika to go along with it because of the utility of Avia's magic. Chase and Avia help smuggle Rika past the transport station guards, and they board a shuttle going off of Antares 3. The shuttle is small, and there's only one other passenger and a pilot aboard. The pilot is a Sagittarius, and the passenger is a Capricorn. Before they can take off, the pilot comes back to the passenger area and sees Rika, and this time, Avia's magic doesn't quite work all of the way. The pilot is definitely calmed down, and he's not freaking out, but they also can't quite dissuade him from trying to calm station security to do a second check on the transit of Scorpios. Editing me here, hi, I just wanted to point something out in the logic. The signs have mandatory ID chips, the sort of thing that would be really painful to remove and difficult to do safely if you weren't a doctor. I also picture each sign as being relatively ethnically unique and having some sort of physical characteristic that's a pretty reliable identifier. For instance, I'm picturing Scorpios as having red irises and dark brown or black hair. In the original source material, zodiac turners all have heterochromia, so that's another option for this. Rika has one red and one gold eye in the original, which is fine in a fantasy setting, even if it is a little bit of a Mary Sue thing. Red eyes were just the thing I held on to. Anyways, before the pilot can calm station security, the other passenger, the Capricorn, stands up and knocks him out. This passenger is Kaya. In the original book, Kaya was a Cancer and a Spirit Walker, but since our party already has a Cancer in this case, I'm making Kaya an Earth sign. Kaya has the recessive form of Capricorn magic. She can mimic the magic of the people around her. They have to be in the direct vicinity, but they don't have to be using their magic for her to do this. She doesn't know what mission the party is on, but she's part of a Zodiac-wide activist group that opposes the oppression of Scorpios and supports an end to the Sagittarian occupation. And when she sees that Rika is a Scorpio evading the law, she decides to knock out the pilot and mimic his Sagittarius powers to fly them out of range of Antares 3. Her motivations are like those of an ethically motivated undergrad. She's a little older than the other members of the party, more educated, and has a very strong moral compass. She effectively inserts herself into the party by getting them out of the Antares system safely, and after a little bit of deliberation, the other members of the party catch her up on the mission. At this point, their plan is to get the transmission data back to Libra, which has some of the best linguists and anthropologists in the Zodiac, hence Chase's specialty. Kaya is a little bolder, and she proposes a different strategy, following the transmission back to Earth. Avia loves this idea. Chase is more of an academic and less of an adventurer, so he has some reservations. And Rika is all around nervous about being around people that are encouraging her to commit even more severe treason than she already has. Eventually, the party comes to a compromise, and they decide to go to Libra first and deliver a copy of the transmission to Chase's academic mentor, and then potentially follow the source of the transmission and see where it leads. The journey takes at least a few days, during which time they keep the Sagittarian pilot in stasis. Kaya pilots the shuttle, Chase studies the transmission, Rika studies star charts to try to figure out what direction they should go after Libra, and Avia goes a little stir-crazy and starts to fret about Rowan and Alina. This is a good time to do some character work and start establishing their group dynamic. Maybe we can have Rika tell us a little bit more about what growing up was like for her and Avia, what it's like to not have magic around a bunch of people that do, etc., etc. We also get a little bit of an explanation about Chase's motives for joining them. The first is academic curiosity, but he's also emotionally invested because he had a brief but intense romantic affair with a Scorpio shortly after getting contracted to Antares 3, and he saw his partner get forcibly reassigned to a strip mining camp. In the Age of Scorpius, Chase is canonically bisexual, and I think this is a better way to establish that Chase has an interest in men. When the party arrives at the Libra homeworld, they make their way to Chase's alma mater to see his academic mentor. By now, Rika is disguised better, though they haven't gone as far as removing their ID chips. Shortly after handing off the transmission copy, though, they find themselves being pursued by a Sagittarian assassin. This is Nara. In the original, she was a Scorpio, I think? Or maybe she was a cusp of a different sign, but she was a zodiac turner, like a Scorpio. In this version, she's a proper Sagittarius, white hair and all. Yes, I picture these Sagittarians as having white hair. I'm revising YA, give me a break. Anyways, Nara is pretty salty, and she's after Rika and the party. Sagittarius has been tracking them via their Sagittarian pilot's ID chips. Like most Sagittarians, Nara's magic has to do with space folding. She can send objects through space ripples faster than the speed of light. Unlike most Sagittarians, she uses this primarily for insta-transporting weapons, so she can be a super overpowered, never not armed YA villain. She confronts Rika and the party, and there's a fight scene in the streets of the Libran capital. Right at the moment when all seems lost, and Rika believes she's about to die, Nara's powers fritz out and stop working. The weapon she's trying to summon doesn't materialize, and Rika doesn't die. The party manages to escape and get back to the shuttle, leaving Nara very confused behind them. Once back at the shuttle, they go to the pilot, who's still in stasis, and they realize that they need to remove his ID chip, as well as their ID chips. Most of the party is really squeamish about this because there's probably blood involved, but Rika eventually steps up and does it herself because she's used to forcing her feelings down through following the Scorpio code. With everyone's ID chips removed, including the pilot's, they leave orbit of Libra, with Kaya piloting once again. They follow the course that Rika has been able to determine from her study of the transmission, and go toward the territory of Aquarius, specifically toward EZ Aquarii, a system that they believe to be uninhabited. On the way there, Rika, Avia, and Chase get into a fight. Avia and Chase start arguing that maybe their mission isn't worth it after seeing Rika remove an unconscious pilot's ID chip without his consent, and they have a moral argument against the continuation of their mission. This makes Rika really angry because she's beginning to realize that their mission is a chance for her to help her people dislodge the Scorpio code and make it out from under the Sagittarian boot, and maybe even offer them a promised land. She gets so worked up over this, in fact, that in spite of her best efforts to stay calm and emotionless, her anger breaks through. When that happens, something goes terribly wrong, and Kaya's magic starts to fritz out. The shuttle goes dead in an empty region of space. Rika's anger turns to panic, and as Chase and Kaya scramble to make sure they don't get too far off course, Avia realizes that she can't feel anyone's emotions, and she should be able to. Rika is having a panic attack, and Avia makes a connection between the fritzing out of magic and Rika experiencing strong emotions. Avia manages to calm Rika down, talking her through the panic attack, and when her emotions level off, everyone's magic returns. The party is stunned by this, and when she recovers, Rika can't help but think of the stories she heard from old Scorpio myths about magic returning should the need for self-defense arise. She starts to think that maybe Scorpio magic is real, but it's emotionally triggered, and it's not as obvious as the other kinds. She can switch other people's magic off. In the commotion of almost getting stranded in space, the Sagittarian pilot is awakened from stasis. At first, it seems like he's going to try to fight them, but he holds off because he's injured and outnumbered. The pilot's name is Atlas Fulbright. In the original Age of Scorpius, Atlas Fulbright was the leader of the Ares faction. I'm changing his sign and role here, but most of the other things are going to be kept the same. When Atlas gets the gist of what's happening with the rest of the party, it becomes clear that he's not a hardliner against Scorpios, but he's also not really on board with everything, especially since he's basically being held hostage. Atlas asks to be taken to the nearest populated world, that would be the Aquarius homeworld, and he gets really upset when the party doesn't acquiesce. It's a good opportunity for Rika and the party to have some thoughts about respecting agency and autonomy, how that relates to the Scorpio code and the way that Rika has been treated her whole life. They don't listen to Atlas, but they do have enough self-awareness to consider if what they're doing is right. With Rika's emotions back under control, Kaya manages to get them to the easy Aquari system, the furthest location Rika has managed to trace so far. When they get there, they're surprised to find that there's an inhabited planet in the system. Editing me here. Hi, I just wanted to drop a little fun fact. Easy Aquari is a triple star system, and the configuration of the inner binary pair could theoretically allow for something called a circumbinary planet near the habitable zone. That means a planet in the correct range for the development of life that orbits 2 stars instead of 1. I just thought that was cool. Thanks, Wikipedia. So there's an inhabited planet orbiting the inner binary star pair of Easy Aquari, and they're approached by 2 really old ships from the surface, which forcibly escort their shuttle down. On the surface, they're greeted by Sora, who, in the original Age of Scorpius, is like this immortal Jedi mentor to Rika, because she's also a Scorpio zodiac turner. Here, she's not an immortal, she's just in charge of off-world security or something like that. But she is going to be a mentor figure to the party. Chase steps in when they land because there's a language divide, and he helps design a translation matrix for the rest of them to use so that they can communicate clearly. Through Chase, Sora explains that the inhabitants of the Easy Aquari system try to keep to themselves and stay clear of the rest of the Zodiac, because they safeguard a lot of ancient historical records and artifacts from the original human exodus. The party asks about magic, and Sora informs them that most of the inhabitants of their world don't have any. They're effectively Scorpios. But some have magic from the different signs if they come from ships that happen to stumble upon them and had to be held back to keep the secret of their world. There are also a few, like Sora herself, who have the ability to do what Rika can do: suppress magic. Sora initially wants to hold the party, and Atlas, on Easy Aquari Prime to maintain the secret of its existence. Atlas is incredibly pissed off about this, as you can probably imagine, and the rest of the party is pretty scared as well. Rika is a little conflicted because on the one hand, she doesn't want to be stuck on Easy Aquari Prime, but she also has never been anywhere where she's not a second-class citizen for not having magic, and that has a real allure. Chase, Avia, and Kaya are insistent that they have to leave, and Sora offers to bring their protest to the ruling body of the planet for consideration due to the nature of their mission. In the meantime, Sora helps Rika train her magical abilities. The ability to suppress magic is a pretty rare thing. It's the recessive form of Scorpio magic, which is part of why Rika has never heard of it on Antares 3. The other part is because Sagittarius has been killing the people that have it and trying to systematically eliminate the gene. In addition to helping Rika with emotional regulation and magic training, Sora gives her access to some of their archives of ancient human artifacts, allowing Rika to indulge her interest in history. Rika takes a particular interest in the old star charts that she finds, and uses some of her astrography knowledge, which is much more up to date than what the scholars of Easy Aquarii Prime have access to start hypothesizing about where Earth could be. During this time, Rika begins to loosen up and starts working the Scorpio code out of her system, even more than she had with the party on the previous parts of their journey. That's primarily facilitated by finding a society in which no one expects her to be emotionless, even on a subconscious level, and Rika begins to figure out who she really is and what she really wants. She also begins to establish a real friendship with Chase, because he's working side by side with her, looking at old documents and trying to translate them. Before Sora can get the party the all-clear to leave the planet and continue their quest, Easy Aquarii Prime is attacked from orbit by a couple of Sagittarian ships. Rika isn't sure how they got there, but her assumption is that Atlas somehow managed to send them a signal behind everyone's back. A massive battle starts, and in the chaos, Nara makes it down to the surface and begins hunting Rika again. Rika is separated from the rest of the party, and she and Nara are both caught directly in the line of fire of a Sagittarian bombing campaign. To Rika's surprise, Nara uses her magic to spacefold both of them off of the surface and up to an unoccupied escape pod in orbit. Nara is clearly mad at herself for saving Rika, and it's obvious that it's a when it came down to it, I wasn't as evil as I thought sort of thing. As the forces of Easy Aquarii Prime and the Sagittarian fleet battle it out, Rika actually grows a spine and forces Nara to use her magic to take them toward Earth. She does that by convincing Nara that she's being tracked by planetary forces and they'll blow them up, and then by using her magic suppression to pressure Nara into agreeing. Nara acquiesces and they transport out for Earth. During this traveling stint, there's a buildup of chemistry between Rika and Nara, and maybe a hint or two that Nara's allegiance could change. They don't come around to the same side, but they do become more comfortable being in the same space, and not assuming that they're going to try to kill each other. Nara explains that part of Sagittarius's motivation, or at least the explanation she was given, was that they have intelligence that returning to Earth could be disastrous for the entire Zodiac, and she feels like she's protecting everyone by taking out Rika and the other people that know about Earth's probable location. Over this period, Rika also begins to realize that she's attracted to Nara, but she holds off on doing anything for so many reasons. As Rika and Nara near the coordinates of Earth, they receive a communication from Kaya, saying that the party is all right and asking where to find them. Nara is kind of confused by this, but doesn't say why, and Rika responds, telling them where to go to meet them on Earth. When Rika and Nara materialize in orbit of Earth, they find that they're not alone. Half of the Sagittarian fleet is there to greet them, and Kaya is at the helm. She has always been a Sagittarius in disguise. We've never seen her use anything but Sagittarian magic, and she secretly signaled Nara to track her to Easy Aquarii Prime. Her mission was to determine the coordinates of Earth, and bring the fleet to destroy it. Rika, furious, is hauled from the escape pod onto the Sagittarian mothership, and Nara rejoins her fleet, although she's somewhat conflicted about doing so. Held hostage on the bridge, Rika, Chase, and Avia, battered and bruised, look down at Earth and see... And that's the end of the first book. Yeah, I know, people are going to be really mad at this cliffhanger, if anyone's watching this. But the Age of Scorpius was meant to be a first in a series, and I thought this was a good, if very annoying, place to end my first book revision pass. So, in addition to everything else, you probably noticed that I also changed the Nara-Rika dynamic from a quicker love story that's filled out by flashbacks and dream sequences to the start of a slow burn enemies to lovers thing that I can picture happening over multiple books. Honestly, now that I'm done with this, I think the changes that I've made sound more like fan fiction than any type of editing, no matter how heavy-handed. Which is a crazy sentence because I do not want to be the person that wrote Age of Scorpius fanfiction. I want to give a little explanation about why I decided to do this. I had a lot of thoughts on how to revise the Age of Scorpius after I listened to the SBU English Club episode on it a few months ago. They've been sitting in the back of my head for a while, and I finally decided to make this because of where I am in my writing process right now. As I established in my very first video on this channel, I've been writing novel-length fiction for about 10 years, and at the end of 2025, I finished some pretty serious editing in preparation for querying for one of those books. Right now, though, I'm working on a brand new project in kind of the meantime for what I hope is getting a literary agent. I just completed writing what I call a zero draft, then rereading and taking notes on it. I'm currently trying to figure out how to revise it. It needs a ton of work, especially in the world building, which is kind of a rare problem for me to have, and I thought that reworking The Age of Scorpius on video would be a good exercise in coloring out a world, even if it's not mine. Sorry if there's an abrupt audio change. I had to re-record this section because I had some different thoughts on this once I was done with my first round of recording, and I wanted to update it. So, like I said, for my past couple books, I've been trying out this new process where instead of thoroughly planning my first draft, I write a zero draft. I do a very bare bones amount of planning for it, just where I think the story should go and maybe a few major characters, but then I write off the cuff and experiment until I stumble my way to the end. I call it a zero draft because it's not workable, and I have to entirely rewrite it for my first draft. I also know that a lot of writers work in a way that's closer to what I just described. It's often called pantsing. I also don't consider what I do pantsing because I'm terrible at it. At most, I'm a plantster. So after I write my zero draft, then comes the process of rereading, taking some notes, and then the arduous task of figuring out what I actually want the story to be about. It often involves some pretty major surgery. For the last book I finished writing, the one about space Romans, I entirely replaced the love interest with a different character that previously had very little to do with the story, but who stole the show every time he made an appearance. I also added a major character arc for the main character that wasn't present at all in my zero draft, and tweaked the plot to fit around those two characters in a way that made a lot more sense. The steps that I just described, basically starting with a draft that I know I'm going to throw away in the end, work better for me because it prevents me from getting too attached too quickly. It helps me be more objective about what's working and what's not working. The zero draft that I just finished writing isn't a manuscript that I care a ton about, especially not on a line level, but as I'm starting to see what it could be, I'm finding more of a reason to care about it. I know that as I write my first draft, my second draft, as I developmentally edit, I'm going to get more and more dedicated to the world and the characters. I'm not going to throw shade at Milo Winter for caring about his stories right off the bat, but there is such a thing as caring too much. In this case, I think it cost him something. The best version of this book. When you care that deeply about something, when you care enough to say that it's the only thing that's kept you going in life, or anything similar to that, it means that every part of it starts to look sacred. That's a really difficult thing to cope with when you're trying to make a piece of art the best it can be. And I'm not trying to condemn Milo for having this problem. I have a story that's like this for me too, and I tried to get it published too. There's actually a story that I want to reference here that might be helpful. It's part of the book When the Moon Hits Your Eye by John Scalzi. One of the chapters is about a young aspiring writer who writes the first 3 chapters of a novel based on the fantasy world that she's had in her head since she was 10. She takes those chapters to critique group after critique group and gets mountains of advice and revises those chapters over and over again, never moving forward. Eventually, she shows them to a published author with a lot of experience, And the author sits her down and tells her that writing is like baking bread. Revising is kneading the dough. When you over-knead it, the gluten in it starts to break down, and the bread doesn't come out very well. The only solution is to let it rest. The Age of Scorpius, to me, reads as simultaneously over-kneaded and underbaked. Milo says he had professional editors, and I believe that, but I'm not sure I believe those edits were taken seriously. That's the underbaked part. But it also reads as over-kneaded to me, because there are so many contradictions in the world building, the action, the general ideas. It's like I'm hearing a chorus of all the different Milos from all the previous parts of his life, all trying to have a say and create the perfect book. The problem is, when you try to do everything perfectly, you do none of it well. The other thing to keep in mind, if you'll forgive the extended bread metaphor, is that sometimes the first loaf you bake isn't good. And that's okay. Feed it to the ducks and try again. So the process of making this video ended up being really illuminating for me. Revising the concept of this book gave me two really important realizations that I think we should keep in mind as, hopefully Milo Winter takes care of the whole refund thing and we can forget about all of this and let him fade into the background for a while. First, the bones of this story are actually really compelling, and I mean that on a very, very base level. I think that the strongest aspect of this story is the code of emotionlessness and how it interacts with a neurodivergent main character. Second realization that I had is that this book needed a massive amount of editing, maybe more than a developmental editor could even offer. If I were to send a manuscript to a developmental editor, it would have gone through a zero draft, a first draft, and my first couple passes at developmental editing, and then I would have sent it off. I feel like if I were to send my zero draft to a developmental editor, I don't think they would be able to help me, because I don't even know at that point what my story is supposed to be about, what I want to make it about. All of that said, I want to give a little bit of praise to the Age of Scorpius. Not the actual book in its current form, but what it could be. I don't know if I could have found a way to revise the concept and the plot in an enjoyable, cohesive way if there wasn't something good there to begin with. I'm going to close out with a segment that I might keep or might not, I'm not sure yet. I'm calling it Recommended Reading. These are books, stories, TV shows, and movies that I'm going to recommend as being adjacent to either the plot of the book I've talked about in the episode or instructive in improving the plot in some manner. I think you'll get what I'm talking about as I do this. Recommended reading for The Age of Scorpius is Zodiac by Ramina Russell, for use of Zodiac themes in a YA genre. Mistborn, The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson, for development of a rules-based magic system. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett, for writing from the perspective of a neurodivergent coded academically inclined main character. Red Rising by Pierce Brown, for excellent disillusionment of a main character and themes of caste system rebellion. The Will of the Many by James Islington, for world building that understands the mechanisms of social and economic oppression. Star Trek Deep Space Nine, for the Cardassian occupation of Bajor. Specifically, I recommend the episode Explorers, Season 3, Episode 22, for its exploration of a colonizer intentionally erasing the history of the colonized. This one is more lighthearted than a lot of the other episodes with this theme. The Orville episode All the World is Birthday Cake. That's Season 2, Episode 5. This episode is about a world where social status is dictated by a zodiac sign, and it's really well done. Thank you guys for watching all of the way through this insane roller coaster of a rewrite. Let me know if you have any requests for book commentary or editing videos like this one. Also, if you have more recommended reading to offer, feel free to comment that. I'll see y'all at some point again.